The Arizona Territory in the late 1870s was not a place that welcomed strangers. It was a landscape of red earth that stained the hem of a skirt and the soul of a man. A place where the wind did not blow so much as scour. The air was dry enough to crack a lip in an hour, and the nights carried a cold that seemed to fall straight from the stars, freezing the breath in the lungs. It was a hard country, indifferent to prayer, and the town of Silver Creek sat in the middle of it like a festering splinter. Silver Creek was swelling, bloating really, with the influx of railroad money and cattle drives. It was a place of wooden facades that promised civilization but delivered only lukewarm whiskey and expensive silence. Men walked the boardwalks with the heavy, stiff-legged gait of those who spent their days in the saddle, and the women, few as they were, kept their heads down and their bonnets pulled tight. Clara McKenna watched the town through the dust-streaked window of the Mercantile, her reflection ghostly against the glass. She was a woman of 30 years, young by the standards of the East but aging quickly in the harsh sun of the West. She had arrived 6 months ago from a life in Ohio that had collapsed under the weight of debts and a marriage that had been a hollow thing long before her husband was buried. She carried a leather medical bag that had belonged to her father, and she carried a rule she repeated to herself every morning while she pinned her hair back: do not get attached, and do not be seen needing anyone. She stepped out of the Mercantile, clutching a small parcel of brown paper. She had bought quinine and clean cotton, and the clerk had made her wait 10 minutes while he chatted with a cattleman, only turning to her when the man had left. He had not apologized. Clara was the town midwife and, by necessity, a healer of cuts, burns, and fevers. But to the men of Silver Creek, she was a utility. She was necessary, like a water trough or a blacksmith's hammer, and treated with about as much tenderness. As she walked down the boardwalk, the wood groaning under her boots, she saw a wagon parked near the livery. A Navajo family sat in the bed of the wagon, surrounded by bundles of raw wool and clay pots fired with distinct, geometric patterns. The father sat straight-backed, holding the reins, while the mother arranged the wares. They were ignored by most, but as Clara watched, a man in a checked suit walked past and deliberately spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the wheel of their wagon. The Navajo man did not flinch. He did not look at the offender. He simply stared at the horizon, his face a mask of practiced indifference. Clara felt a hot flare of anger in her chest, sharp and sudden, but she swallowed it. She had learned that her anger was a currency that bought nothing in this town. She nodded to the woman in the wagon as she passed. The woman looked at her, dark eyes unreadable, and gave the slightest inclination of her head. It was enough. Later that afternoon, the sun began to dip, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The heat of the day lingered in the dust as Hastian Biage rode into town. He was a man built of wire and old iron, broad-shouldered despite the years that pulled at him. His hair was long, black streaked heavily with the gray of winter frost, tied back severely. He wore trousers of rough wool and a shirt that had been mended so many times it was more thread than fabric. Hastian did not come to Silver Creek for pleasure. He came because the cattle rancher, a man named Sullivan, owed him $12 for tracking 3 strays out of the Box Canyon 2 days prior. $12 was a fortune. It was flour, coffee, and ammunition. He tied his horse, a roan mare with a white blaze, to the rail outside the Lucky Star Saloon. He patted her neck once, a silent promise to return quickly, and stepped onto the boardwalk. He kept his gaze low. This was not shame. Hastian had survived the long walk, the forced march that had tried to break his people's legs and spirits. He had buried more family than he had fingers to count them. He kept his eyes down because eye contact in a town like this was an invitation to violence, and he was tired of violence. He was here for business. The saloon was dim, smelling of stale beer, sawdust, and unwashed bodies. A piano player in the corner was hammering out a tune that sounded cheerful and desperate all at once. Hastian moved to the end of the bar, far from the cluster of tables where men played faro and poker. The barkeep, a man with a walrus mustache and eyes like wet stones, ignored him for a long minute. wiping a rag across the wood. Finally, he drifted over. "What do you want?" he asked, not offering a glass. "I am looking for Mr. Sullivan," Hastings said. His voice was deep, scraping like gravel against the bottom of a riverbed. "He owes for the cattle. He ain't here," the barkeep said, turning away. "Come back next week." Hastings did not move. He said he would leave the money here. The barkeep stopped and looked back, irritation flaring. "I ain't a bank. Get out." The room had quieted. The presence of an Indian at the bar was enough to disrupt the rhythm of the evening. Clara, who had come in through the side door to deliver a salve to the piano player for his arthritic knuckles, froze in the shadows of the hallway. She saw the tension in Hastings' shoulders, the way he stood completely still. Then the bat-wing doors swung open, crashing against the walls. Cole Riker stepped in, bringing the dust and the noise of the street with him. He was young, perhaps 22, with a face that was handsome in a cruel, unfinished way. He wore a gun belt that hung too low on his hips, mimicking the pistoliers he read about in dime novels. Behind him were two other men, older, dirtier, grinning like jackals waiting for scraps. Cole laughed at something one of them said, a loud, braying sound that demanded attention. He walked to the bar, shoving a patron aside without looking. "Whiskey," he demanded. "And leave the bottle." The barkeep moved with alacrity. Producing a bottle and 3 glasses, Cole poured, the amber liquid splashing over his hand. He drank it in one gulp, wiped his mouth with his sleeve. And then he saw Hastings. The smile that spread across Cole's face was not a smile of greeting. It was the smile a boy gives when he finds a lizard he intends to torment. "Well now," Cole said, his voice carrying to the corners of the room. "Look what we have here. The wind blows some trash in from the reservation." Hastings did not turn. He kept his eyes on the grain of the wood bar. Cole stepped closer, the spurs on his boots jingling. "I am talking to you, old man. You deaf as well as dumb?" The room went silent. The piano player stopped mid-measure. The Sheriff Alden, was sitting at a table near the back, nursing a beer. He was a polished man, his star pinned to a vest that was clean and pressed. He looked up, saw the situation, and then looked back down at his drink. Clara watched him, her stomach tightening. She had seen this before. Sheriff Alden had a talent for blindness when it suited him. Cole leaned in, the smell of cheap whiskey radiating from him. Hastings could smell it, sour and sharp. He could smell the boy's fear, too, buried under the bravado. Cole was hungry to be feared, and that made him dangerous. "Hey!" Cole barked. Hastings slowly turned his head. His face was impassive, a landscape of lines and scars. He looked at Cole not with anger, but with a weary patience. "I have no quarrel with you, boy," Hastings said. The word boy snapped something in Cole. He was desperate to be a man, to be seen as a threat. His friends snickered behind him. "You do not speak to me," Cole hissed. He looked around the room, performing for his audience. Look at him, standing here like a person, smelling up the place. The room half laughed, a nervous, skittering sound. They were relieved the target was not them. Cole grabbed the whiskey bottle from the bar. It was half full. He weighed it in his hand, his eyes bright with malice. "You need to learn your place. Savage." Hastings remained silent. He did not reach for the knife at his belt. He did not step back. He simply stood, a rock in a stream. Cole stepped close, invading Hastings' space. He raised the bottle. Clara wanted to shout, to call out to the sheriff, but her voice died in her throat. It happened too fast. Cole brought the bottle down. The sound was sickening. A heavy thud followed by the shatter of glass. The bottle exploded against the side of Hastings' head. Whiskey and blood sprayed across the bar, running together in a dark, sticky river. Shards of glass caught the lamplight as they fell. Hastings' head snapped to the side. He staggered, gripping the edge of the bar with a hand that turned white at the knuckles. Cole stepped back, laughing, waiting for the old man to collapse. That was how it worked in his head. You hit them, and they fell, but Hastings did not fall. The room held its breath, slowly, terrifyingly slowly. Hastings straightened. Blood poured from a gash in his scalp, matting his gray-streaked hair, running down his temple and into the deep grooves of his cheek. It dripped onto his shoulder, soaking the rough wool of his shirt. Hastings turned to face Cole. His eyes were clear. The weary patience was gone, replaced by something ancient and cold. He wiped a hand across his face, smearing the blood. And then he grinned. It was a grin of quiet menace, a baring of teeth that promised ruin. "Now me, boy," Hastings said. Cole's laugh died in his throat. He reached for his gun, but he was clumsy, his hands slick with sweat. Hastings moved. He did not swing wild haymakers like a drunkard. He moved like a storm breaking over a canyon. He stepped inside Cole's guard, his left hand clamping onto Cole's wrist, pinning the gun in the holster. His right hand, a fist like a stone mallet, drove into Cole's stomach. The air left Cole in a whooshing gasp. He folded, his eyes bulging. Hastings did not stop. He brought his knee up into Cole's face. A brutal, efficient crack of bone. Cole reeled back, blood spurting from his nose. Hastings grabbed him by the lapels of his dusty coat and threw him. Cole flew backward, crashing into a table, splintering the wood and sending cards and chips flying. Cole's gangmates started to move, hands going to their weapons. Hastings spun on them, snatching a heavy brass spittoon from the floor and hurling it with terrifying accuracy. It caught the first man in the shoulder, knocking him off balance. The second man hesitated, looking at Hastings, who stood amidst the wreckage, blood on his face, chest heaving, ready to kill them all with his bare hands. "That is enough." Sheriff Alden's voice cut through the air. The sheriff stood up, his hand resting casually on his revolver. He walked over to where Cole lay groaning in the sawdust, clutching his broken nose. Alden looked at Hastings, his eyes hard. "You caused a hell of a mess," the sheriff said to Hastings. Hastings stared at him. "He struck me," Hastings said. The blood was dripping off his chin now, pattering onto the floorboards. "I saw a fight," Alden said smoothly, "and I see a disturbing the peace." Cole's friends dragged the boy up. Cole was weeping, a mix of pain and humiliation. "You will pay for this," Cole sputtered through bloodied lips. "I will kill you. Get him out of here," Alden told the gang members. He did not warn them about the threat. He turned his attention back to Hastings. "You get out, too," Alden said, "and don't let me see you in this town after sundown." Hastings looked at the sheriff, then at the bartender, then at the silent room. He adjusted his shirt, wiped his hands on his trousers, and turned to the door. He walked with his head high, but Clara could see the slight waver in his step. The blow to the head had been severe. The saloon door swung shut behind him. The room exploded into chatter, the tension breaking into nervous laughter and boasts of what they would have done. Clara did not listen. She pushed off the wall and hurried out the side door, circling around to the front street. She saw Hastings unhitching his horse. He fumbled with the knot, his fingers thick and clumsy. He leaned his forehead against the mare's saddle for a moment, closing his eyes. "Sir," Clara called out softly. Hastings stiffened, turning quickly, his hand going to his belt. When he saw it was the white woman with the medical bag, he relaxed slightly, but his guard remained up. "You are hurt," Clara said, stepping closer. "That cut needs cleaning." "I am fine," Hastings said. His English was accented, the vowels round and deep. "I must go." "You are going to fall off that horse before you make the ridge," Clara said, her voice firm. She was in her element now. This was not social nicety, this was triage. You have a concussion and a laceration that is still bleeding freely. If you ride out into the cold like that, you will faint. Hastings looked at her. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. "Why do you care?" "Because I am a midwife, and I patch up fools who get hit with bottles." Clara said, "My room is just behind the mercantile. I have water and needle and thread." Hastings hesitated. Pride held his tongue. He was a warrior, a survivor. He did not need charity from a white woman in a town that hated him. But he also knew the dizziness that was swimming behind his eyes. He knew that infection could kill a man as surely as a bullet. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin. Clara led the way. They walked in silence, Hastian leading his horse. The town was busy with evening traffic, but people gave them a wide berth. A white woman walking with a bleeding Navajo was a sight that drew stares, whispers, and open glares. Clara kept her back straight, refusing to acknowledge them. Her room was small, a lean-to addition at the back of the general store. It was sparse, a narrow bed, a table, a wash basin, and shelves lined with jars and folded linens. It smelled of lye soap and dried sage. "Sit," Clara commanded, pointing to the wooden chair. Hastian sat heavily. He placed his hat on his knee. Clara poured water from a pitcher into the basin. She added a few drops of carbolic acid, the smell sharp and medicinal. She dipped a clean cloth into the water and wrung it out. "This will sting," she said. Hastian did not answer. He stared at the wall. Clara stepped in close. She gently parted the blood-matted hair. The cut was jagged, a nasty slice along the parietal bone. Glass glittered in the wound. "I have to pick the glass out," Clara murmured. "Hold still." She worked with efficient, steady hands. She used tweezers to pull out the shards, dropping them into a tin cup where they made small, musical chinking sounds. Hastian did not make a sound. His breathing was controlled, slow and rhythmic, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Clara could feel the heat radiating from him. She could smell the dust on his skin, the iron scent of blood, and the faint, sweet smell of the sagebrush he must have ridden through. It was an intimate proximity. In this town, bodies were usually only this close in violence or in the darker corners of the brothels. Here, the air was heavy with a different kind of tension, a trust that neither of them named, but both felt. She rinsed the cloth again, the water in the basin turning pink. "Why didn't you kill him?" Clara asked quietly. She didn't look at his face, keeping her eyes on the wound as she began to stitch. Hastian was silent for a long moment. She thought perhaps he wouldn't answer. The needle pulled through the tough skin of his scalp. "Killing is easy," Hastian said finally. His voice was low, vibrating in his chest near where her arm brushed him. Clara paused, her hand hovering. "To take a life takes only a twitch of a finger." Hastian continued. "I have taken many. When I was young, when the soldiers came," he looked up then, turning slightly so he could see her face. His eyes were dark, endless wells of memory. "But the dead do not leave you," he said. "They walk behind you. They sit at your fire. I have enough ghosts, living with what follows the killing. That is the harder road." Clara resumed stitching, her heart beating a little faster. She understood ghosts. She had a husband who had died of cowardice and left her with nothing. She had a child she had never carried to term, lost years ago in the stress of her failing marriage. "You are a strange man." "Hastian Biage," she said softly. "And you are a strange white woman," he countered. "You touch me, and your hands do not shake with fear or hate." "I am a nurse," Clara said, tying off the knot. "Flesh is flesh. It all bleeds red." She stepped back, wiping her hands on a towel. "There, keep it dry. Do not scratch it." Hastian stood up. The dizziness seemed to have passed, or he had simply willed it away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tipped it, and 2 silver coins fell into his palm. "I do not have much," he said. "Keep your money," Clara said sharply. "I do not take charity," Hastian said, his voice hard. "It is not charity," Clara said. "It is an apology. For the town. For the bottle." Hastian looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he placed 1 coin on the table. "For the thread," he said. He put his hat on, wincing slightly as it settled over the bandage. He looked at her one last time, a look that searched her face as if memorizing the map of it. "Watch yourself. Healer," he said. "This town does not like things that are different." Then he was gone, slipping out the door into the deepening twilight. The next morning, the town of Silver Creek was buzzing like a kicked hive. The story had already mutated, as stories do in the desert heat. By the time Clara bought her morning coffee, the rumor was that the Indian had assaulted Cole Riker. A good boy from a local ranching family. For no reason at all. There was talk that Hastien had pulled a knife, that he had threatened to scalp the whole bar. Clara tried to correct the mercantile clerk. He hit him with a bottle first, she said. The clerk just shrugged. Doesn't matter who started it, Mrs. McKenna. Matters who finished it. You best not get involved. Folks saw you taking him in last night. It doesn't look right. Clara walked out, her coffee tasting bitter. The injustice of it sat in her stomach like a stone. 3 miles out of town, where the scrub brush gave way to the deeper canyons, Hastien returned to the camp of his people. It was a small settlement, a cluster of hogans built from cedar and earth, blending into the landscape so well that a man might ride past without seeing it. He dismounted, his head throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache. An elder, a man named Chi with a face like a dried apple, came out to meet him. Chi did not ask about the bandage. He looked at Hastien's empty saddlebags. No money? Chi asked in Navajo. No money, Hastien replied. And trouble? Chi nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. Trouble is here already. Hastien stiffened. What happened? 2 horses, Chi said, taken in the night. From the lower corral. They cut the rope. Hastien cursed softly. It was a message. Cole Riker and his friends had not waited for the sun to rise. They had come in the dark, thieves and cowards, to strike at what the Navajo valued most. Hastien walked to the edge of the camp. The wind was picking up, whipping the dust into small devils that danced across the sage. He looked toward the town, toward the horizon, back in Silver Creek. Clara stood on the porch of her room. The sun was setting, casting the world in a blood-red light. She looked out toward the open desert, hugging her shawl tight around her shoulders. The wind howled, a lonely, mournful sound. On the far horizon, against the dying light of the orange dusk, she saw them, riders, 4 or 5 of them, moving fast, silhouetted like dark punctuation marks against the sky. They were riding hard, heading away from town, heading toward the canyon lands where the Navajo camp lay hidden. Retaliation was on its way, riding on thundering hooves. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Clara felt the cold seep into her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the coming night. Cole Riker sat on a crate in the shadows of the barn, holding a piece of raw steak to his face. His nose was a ruin, swollen to twice its size and turning a shade of purple that looked like a storm cloud. Every breath whistled through the blockage, a humiliating reminder of the saloon floor and the copper taste of his own blood. Dane Voss stood near the open doors, watching his men brand a cluster of stolen heifers. Voss was a man who did not look like a bandit. He dressed like a banker, in a gray woolen suit and a stiff collar. But his eyes were dead things, devoid of any light that suggested a conscience. He made his money on fear and beef, and right now, the exchange rate on fear was dropping. You look like a dropped pie. Cole, Voss said, not turning around. Cole lowered the steak. It wasn't my fault. Dane, the old savage, he put you on the floor in front of half the town. Voss interrupted, his voice smooth and cold. He made you look weak, and if you look weak, Cole, then I look weak, and I do not tolerate weakness. It is bad for profit. Cole scowled, wincing as the movement pulled at his bruised skin. He got lucky. Luck is for fools, Voss said. He turned then, walking over to where Cole sat. He looked down at the younger man with disdain. You are going to fix this, not with a bar fight, not with whiskey courage. You are going to remind this town, and that Indian who holds the leash here. Do you understand? I want him dead, Cole hissed. Death is too quick, Voss said. Make him wish he had stayed on the reservation. Break what he protects. Then you can kill him. Later that night, the moon hung low and yellow over Silver Creek. Sheriff Alden met Dane Voss behind the livery stable, where the smell of manure and damp hay masked their conversation. The sheriff smoked a cigar, the ember glowing like a red eye in the dark. The town is getting jittery, Alden said. People are talking about the fight. Let them talk, Voss replied. Talk doesn't stop the trains. The Navajo is a problem, Alden said, exhaling a plume of smoke. He is not like the others. He does not scare easy. And now he has the midwife looking after him." Voss chuckled, a dry sound like dry leaves scraping together. "A woman with a medical bag and an old warrior. I tremble to think of it. If he pushes back," Alden said, "I cannot just shoot him in the street. Not without cause. The territorial judge is due in a month. I need clean books." "You will have your clean books," Voss said. "Just make sure you look the other way when the dust kicks up. If the Navajo problem is handled, the protection payments continue. If not, well, a sheriff is a replaceable position." Alden stayed silent for a moment, then nodded. "Just keep it out of the main street." The raid happened 2 hours before dawn. When the desert is at its coldest and the sleep of the weary is deepest, it was not a battle. It was an erasure. Cole and 5 men rode into the Navajo camp on the edge of the canyon. They did not shoot people. They shot livestock. The sound of rifles cracking in the dark was followed by the screams of horses and the bleating of sheep. They threw torches onto the roofs of the hogans, the dry cedar bark catching fire instantly. They rode through the smoke like demons, overturning water barrels, slashing bags of flour, and scattering the winter stores into the dirt before they left. Cole dismounted near the central fire pit. He took a knife and carved a crude shape into the wood of the loom that belonged to the camp matriarch. A jagged line, a broken horizon, a sign that said, "Leave, or be broken." Hastian found the damage when he returned from a night spent tracking a cougar that had been stalking the goats. He crested the ridge as the sun began to bleed over the mountains, revealing the devastation. The silence was the worst part. There was no wailing. The Navajo had learned long ago that tears did not put out fires. The elders stood amidst the ash of their winter supplies, staring at the ground with dry, hard eyes. They had run out of tears years ago. Smoke curled lazily from the ruins of 2 hogans. A dog lay dead near the water trough. The earth was churned by the hooves of shod horses, iron shoes, white man's horses. Hastian walked into the center of the camp. His face was a mask of stone, but inside, a fire raged that threatened to consume him. He saw the slashed flour sacks, the white powder mixed with the red dirt, food for a month, destroyed in a minute. He saw the loom, the intricate rug half finished, now slashed and burned. He touched the jagged mark Cole had left. "Hasten," he turned. Clara McKenna was there. She had arrived in her small buggy, the horse lathered. She must have seen the smoke from town. She was already working. She had her bag open on a flat rock. She was tending to a young woman whose arm had been burned trying to save a blanket from the flames. "Why are you here?" Hastian asked, his voice rough. Clara did not look up from her work. She was spreading a yellow salve over the burn. "Because there are people hurt. Hasten." Some of the women watched her with suspicion. They stood back, clutching their children. They knew white help often came with a hook, a demand for conversion, or labor, or land. One of the grandmothers stepped forward and said something sharp in Navajo, gesturing for the young woman to pull away from Clara. Clara did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply held the jar of salve out. "Use it," she said. "It stops the pain." She set the jar down and moved to a man who had a gash on his forehead from a pistol whip. She cleaned it with water from her own canteen, ignoring the tension that hung in the air like static electricity. Hastian watched her. He saw the set of her jaw, the stubborn line of her shoulders. She was tired. Her dress was dusty, and she was unwanted here. But she stayed. She worked with a dogged persistence that mirrored his own refusal to break. It pulled at him. This sight of her. It irritated him because he did not want to owe her anything. He did not want to worry about her, but it warmed him, too. A small ember in the cold ash of his mourning. He walked over to the grandmother who had spoken. "Let her work, grandmother," he said in their tongue. "Her hands are good." The old woman looked at Hasten, then at Clara. She nodded once, slowly. That night, the camp was quiet. The fires were kept low. Hasten sat on a log near the edge of the light, sharpening his knife. Clara sat a few feet away, drinking coffee from a tin cup. She had stayed all day, and now it was too dark to ride back safely. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound, the rhythmic rasp of the whetstone against steel. "My husband," Clara said suddenly, her voice low. "He didn't just die of fever." Hastien paused the knife. He did not look at her, giving her the privacy of the darkness. "Everyone thinks he was a tragic figure," Clara continued. "A pioneer who lost his battle with the frontier, but he was a coward." She took a sip of the bitter coffee. "He gambled away the money for the land. Then he gambled away the money for the seed. When the debts came due, and a man named Varon came to collect, my husband hid in the barn. He left me to face them." Hastien turned the knife over, inspecting the edge. "I had to give them everything," Clara said. "The wedding silver, the wagon, my dignity. When he died a month later, it wasn't the fever that killed him. It was the shame. He gave up. He left me to crawl out of that hole alone." She looked at Hastien. "That is why I don't like safe. Hastien, safe is just waiting for someone else to fail you." Hastien sheathed the knife. It made a soft click. "I was at the Bosque Redondo," he said, "the place they call the Long Walk." Clara went still. She had heard rumors of the internment, of the thousands of Navajo marched hundreds of miles by the army to a desolate reservation in New Mexico. 4 years. Hastien said, "The water made us sick. The corn would not grow. There was no wood for fires. So we dug up roots. We ate rats." He looked at his hands, scarred and broad. "The soldiers, they did not see us. To them, we were cattle, less than cattle. If you spoke our language too loud, you were beaten. If you sang the morning prayers, you were beaten. I forgot words. I forgot the names of the mountains." He looked up at the stars, which seemed very far away. "You lose the language inside you. You stop being human because being human hurts too much. You just become a stomach that is empty and feet that must walk." He turned to Clara. "You crawled out of your hole. Clara, I walked out of mine. We are the same. We carry the dead, but we do not let them ride our backs." It was the most he had ever spoken to her at one time. The air between them shifted, heavy with the weight of shared scars. They were two people who did not perform their pain for sympathy. They simply carried it, like water, like wood. In the days that followed, the town of Silver Creek tightened its grip. The invisible line that separated civilized folks from the savages became a wall, and Clara was standing on the wrong side of it. When she went to the general store to buy bandages, the clerk, Mr. Henderson, kept his back turned. "I need cotton." "Mr. Henderson," Clara said. "We are out," he said flatly, wiping a counter that was already clean. "I see the bolt on the shelf right there. Reserved," he said, "for paying customers. I have money. Not the kind we want here. Mrs. McKenna." She walked out, her cheeks burning. On Sunday, the pastor stopped her at the church door. He was a tall man with a voice like a heavy drape. "Sister Clara," he said, blocking her path. "There is concern among the flock. You are spending a great deal of time at the camp. I am doing my job. Reverend, you are confusing your place," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a shout. "You are a white woman, a widow. It is unseemly. You are inviting darkness into your soul." "My soul is fine," Clara said, stepping around him. "It is my supply cabinet that is suffering." The threat became official 2 days later. A deputy she didn't know, a man with a wandering eye and a breath that smelled of onions, stopped her buggy. "Sheriff says to tell you," the deputy said, leaning on her wheel. "You got a license to practice medicine in this territory? You know I do." Clara said, "Well, paper gets lost." The deputy grinned. "Especially when folks go where they ain't wanted. You keep stitching up those Indians, you might find your license revoked. Then you'd just be a woman loitering. And we got laws against that." Clara gripped the reins until her knuckles were white. "Get away from my wheel." The deputy laughed and slapped the horse's rump, sending the buggy lurching forward. The escalation didn't stop at words. "To bait a wolf. You do not hunt him, you trap his cub." Tohan was 16, a boy with a quick smile and a talent for carving wood. He had come to town to trade a small cedar horse for a bag of sugar. He was near the livery stable when the sheriff's hand clamped onto his shoulder. "That is my horse you are eyeing. Boy, Sheriff Alden lied loudly. Tohan froze. No, Sheriff, I'm just walking. I say you are stealing, Alden announced. He dragged the boy toward the jail. Word reached the camp within the hour. Hastian did not rage. He did not yell. He simply stood up, put on his hat, and checked the load in his revolver. I am coming, Clara said. She was at the camp checking on the burns. No, Hastian said. This is men's business. This is my business, Clara snapped. They will kill you if you go alone. That is what they want. A reason. She climbed into her buggy. I am driving. The scene at the jailhouse was a theater of cruelty. A crowd had gathered, men with nothing better to do than watch a humiliation. Tohan was in the cell, visible through the barred window. Clutching the bars, Hastian stepped out of the buggy. The crowd parted, but not out of respect. They formed a gauntlet. Look at the chief, someone shouted. Come for his pup. A man spat on the ground near Hastian's boot. Another shoulder checked him as he passed. Hastian did not react. He kept his eyes on the sheriff, who sat on a chair on the boardwalk, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. I have come for the boy, Hastian said. Sheriff Alden looked up, feigning surprise. He is a thief, Hastian. Caught him red-handed. He has never stolen. Hastian said, his word against mine. Alden smiled. And in this town, my word is law. How much? Clara's voice cut through the jeers. She stepped down from the buggy, smoothing her skirt. She walked through the crowd, her head high. She stood next to Hastian, shoulder to shoulder. Excuse me, Mrs. McKenna, Alden asked, his eyes narrowing. How much is the bail? Clara asked. Or are we skipping straight to the hanging without a trial? He attempted horse theft, Alden said. That is a hanging offense. Where is the horse? Clara demanded. Show me the horse he stole. Was he riding it? Was he leading it? Or was he just standing near a livery stable that is on a public street? The crowd muttered. Logic was a dampener on a mob's enthusiasm. You are making a mistake, getting in the middle of this, Alden warned. I am a witness to this boy's character, Clara said loudly. Turning to the crowd, he was at the camp all morning helping me. He came to town an hour ago to buy sugar. Unless he learned to fly, he didn't have time to steal a horse. She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather purse. She slammed it onto the sheriff's lap. $50, she said, for damages to the sheriff's peace of mind. Let him go. Alden looked at the money, then at the crowd. He saw the doubt creeping in. He saw that Clara had turned this from a righteous arrest into a bullying of a woman and a boy. It wasn't the show he wanted. He picked up the purse. He stood up and unlocked the cell door. Get him out, Alden muttered. Tohan ran out, stumbling into Hastian's arms. Hastian held him for a second, feeling the boy's trembling, then pushed him toward the buggy. Alden leaned in close to Clara. You bought him a day, Mrs. McKenna, but you are buying enemies who don't miss. Clara did not flinch. Keep the change. Sheriff. The ride back was silent until they were well clear of the town. Hastian rode his horse alongside the buggy. You should not have done that. Hastian said, he is a child. Clara said, it was my fight. It is our fight. Hastian, Clara said, looking at him. Whether you like it or not. The following week, the atmosphere at the camp changed. Hastian stopped tracking cattle. He began to track men. He took the young men of the camp, Tohan included, into the deep canyons. He did not give them rifles. They had few, and ammunition was scarce. He taught them the old ways. He taught them how to move across dry leaves without a sound. He taught them how to cover their tracks with a branch of sagebrush. He taught them how to signal with the call of a hawk and the flash of a mirror. We do not fight a war, Hastian told them as they crouched in the shade of a sandstone overhang. If we fight, the soldiers come. If the soldiers come, we die. We fight to survive. We see them before they see us. We know where the water is. We know where the shadows are. He looked at Tohan. They want us to be savages. We will be ghosts. One evening, Clara stayed late at the camp to deliver a baby. It was a difficult birth, but successful. By the time she was ready to leave, the moon was high and full, painting the desert in silver and blue. I will ride with you, Hastings said. I know the way, Clara said, though she was tired. There are coyotes, Hastings said, and worse. He tied his horse to the back of her buggy and climbed onto the seat beside her. He took the reins. They rode in silence, the wheels crunching softly on the gravel. The air was cool, a relief after the heat of the day. The cactus spines glowed like needles in the moonlight. The buggy hit a rut, jolting sideways. Hastings braced himself, and his knee brushed against Clara's. He did not pull away immediately. The contact was electric, a sudden jolt of warmth that traveled up Clara's leg and settled in her chest. She looked at him. His profile was sharp against the stars. She shifted slightly, not away, but just enough to acknowledge the closeness. The air between them felt thin, charged. Hastings, she whispered. He turned his head. His eyes were dark, searching hers. For a moment, the warrior was gone, and there was just a man who had been lonely for a very long time. He leaned in, just an inch. Clara's breath hitched. She wanted this. She wanted to be held, to be seen as something other than a widow or a nurse. Then, Hastings pulled back. He gripped the reins tighter, his knuckles whitening. He stared straight ahead at the road. We are close to town, he said, his voice flat. Clara felt the rejection like a slap. Why do you do that? She asked, her voice trembling. Do what? You pull away. Every time it becomes real, you run. I do not run, Hastings said. I am protecting you. From what? From feeling something? From the world. Clara, Hastings snapped, looking at her. Look at us, a white woman and a Navajo. Do you think they will let us be? They will burn your house. They will kill me. Closeness is dangerous. It is just another thing for them to punish. Clara turned in her seat to face him fully. I don't care, she said. I am tired of being safe. Hastings, safe is just being numb. Safe is dying slowly in a room by yourself. She reached out and covered his hand on the reins. Her hand was small and pale against his dark, weathered skin. I don't ask you to promise me a future, she said softly. I know what world we live in. I just ask you to be honest. Don't tell me you don't feel it. Hastings looked at her hand, then up at her eyes. The mask cracked. I feel it, he whispered. That is why I'm afraid. The moment hung there, fragile as glass, before Hastings clicked his tongue at the horse, urging it forward. They did not speak again, but he did not move his hand from under hers. 2 days later, the violence escalated from threats to blood. A supply wagon, driven by 2 of the camp's men and carrying an elder named Nez, was ambushed in a dry wash 5 miles north of the camp. It was not a robbery. The flour was spilt, the coffee poured into the sand. But this time, they shot the horses, and they beat Nez. When Hastings arrived at the scene, the wagon was overturned. Nez was conscious but badly bruised, his arm broken. The younger men were bloodied but alive. Hastings walked the perimeter of the ambush site. He read the ground like a book. He saw the boot prints of 4 men. He saw the shell casings, .44 caliber. Then he saw something else. In the soft sand near a mesquite bush, where one of the attackers had knelt to reload, there was a print. It was not a boot. It was a moccasin. But it was not a Navajo moccasin. The stitching on the heel was distinct, a pattern of 3 knots. Hastings froze. He knew that pattern. He had seen it years ago, scouting for the army before the long walk. It belonged to a tracker named Silvers, a man from a northern tribe who sold his skills to whoever paid the most, a man who knew the land as well as Hastings did. Voss didn't just have bandits. He had a hunter. Hastings touched the print, his fingers brushing the sand. The game had changed. They were not just fighting thugs anymore. They were fighting someone who knew how to hunt ghosts. He stood up, the desert wind whipping his hair across his face. He looked toward the purple mountains, his eyes narrowing. They have a tracker, he said to the wind. He turned back to the broken wagon. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to hunt back. The discovery of the tracker changed the complexion of the war. It was no longer a matter of brute force against brute force. It was a game of chess played on a board of sandstone and dust. Hastian sat with Chi, the elder, by the smoldering remains of the communal fire pit. In his hand, Hastian held a drawing he had made in the dirt, the distinct print of a moccasin with a triple-knotted heel. "It is Silver's," Hastian said, his voice devoid of inflection. Chi spat into the fire. "The half-breed, the one who rode with the gray coats. He knows the water holes." Hastian said, "He knows how we move. That is how they found the lower canyon in the dark. That is how they knew when the men were away." The realization settled over them like a shroud. Dane Voss was not just hiring thugs. He was hiring competence. 2 days later, the competence turned into cruelty. The raid did not come at night. It came in the blinding white heat of midday, down by the river where the women washed wool and the children played in the shallows. It was a chaotic, screaming thing. 4 riders burst from the willow brakes, firing pistols into the air, driving the women back. They did not take horses. They did not take wool. One of the riders, a man with a red scarf tied over his face, leaned low from his saddle and scooped up a child. It was little Yazi, a boy of 6 winters who had been chasing frogs in the mud. The mother, a woman named Desba, screamed a sound that tore the throat. She ran into the water, splashing through the shallows, reaching for the horse's tail, but the rider kicked her back. She fell into the silt, the water churning brown around her. As the riders turned and galloped back into the scrub, panic erupted in the camp. Men ran for weapons that were not there. Women gathered the remaining children, pushing them into the hogans. Clara was there when they brought Desba up from the river. The woman was soaking wet, her dress clinging to her legs, shivering violently in the heat. She was not crying. She was making a low, keening sound that did not stop. Clara knelt beside her. "Desba, look at me," she said, taking the woman's cold hands. Desba looked through her. "He is gone," she whispered. "My boy." Clara felt a sharp, jagged crack in her own chest. It was an old wound, poorly healed. She remembered the silence of a nursery that would never be used. She remembered the feeling of small clothes folded into a trunk, the weight of a life that never began. Helplessness washed over her, a bitter, metallic taste. She was a healer. She could stitch flesh and set bone, but she could not cure this. She could not stitch a mother's heart back together. She looked up and saw Hastian standing a few yards away. He was watching Desba. His face was a mask of terrible stillness. He was not looking at the grief. He was looking past it, calculating. He turned and walked toward the corral. Clara scrambled up, her skirts heavy with dust. "Where are you going?" "To get him," Hastian said. He did not stop walking. "You cannot go alone," Clara said, catching up to him. "They have a tracker. They have numbers." "I will not go alone," Hastian said. He pointed to Tohan, who was already bridling a horse, his young face pale but set in grim determination. "And 2 others. I am coming," Clara said. Hastian stopped. He turned to face her, his eyes hard. "No, you stay. This is not a place for you. It will be fast, and it will be ugly. I am not asking for permission." "Hastian," Clara said. Her voice shook, but she did not back down. "That boy has asthma. When the dust kicks up, his chest tightens. If you find him and he cannot breathe, can you save him? Can you mix the datura powder to open his lungs?" Hastian looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the iron. He saw the same refusal to be useless that drove him. "Can you ride hard?" he asked. "I rode here, didn't I?" "Get your horse," Hastian said. The landscape they rode into was not merely a backdrop. It was an adversary. The canyon country of the Arizona Territory was a place where the earth had been flayed open, revealing ribs of red rock and veins of quartz. The sun was a physical weight, hammering down on their shoulders, punishing any skin left exposed. They rode in a single file. Hastian took the lead, his eyes scanning the ground, reading the story written in the dust. Tohan rode second, then Clara, with the 2 Navajo riders, Beachy and Kla, bringing up the rear. Each mile tested them. The trail led up steep shale slopes where the horses scrambled for footing. sending cascades of rock clattering into the void below. It led through narrow slots where the walls pressed in so close the sky became a thin blue ribbon far above. Clara learned to read Hastings' back. When he stiffened, she knew he saw something. A broken twig, a shift in the wind. When he slumped slightly, she knew they were safe for the moment. She began to see the land through his silence. He did not speak of the heat, he simply found the shadowed side of the ravine. He did not complain of thirst. He knew where the seep springs hid under the mossy rocks. And Hastings began to rely on her. When they stopped to water the horses, Clara was the one who checked the animals for stone bruises. When Claw cut his hand on a sharp piece of mesquite, Clara had it cleaned and bound before Hastings could even dismount. They were becoming a single organism, moving with a shared purpose. On the second afternoon, the sky turned a bruised purple in the west. The air grew heavy and still, the kind of silence that screams of violence. "Storm," Hastings said, pointing to the wall of clouds devouring the sun. "High ground. Now." They scrambled up a deer trail toward a limestone shelf just as the heavens opened. It was not rain. It was a deluge. The water fell in sheets, instantly turning the dry wash below them into a raging brown torrent of mud and boulders. They huddled under a rock overhang, a shallow cave barely deep enough to keep the horses and themselves dry. The temperature plummeted. The desert, so recently an oven, became an icebox. Clara shivered, her teeth chattering despite her efforts to clamp her jaw shut. She rubbed her arms, her wet dress clinging cold against her skin. Hastings watched her from the edge of the overhang. He did not say anything. He unrolled his bedroll and took out his heavy wool blanket. He walked over to where she sat against the rock wall. "Here," he said, holding it out. "You will freeze." Clara said, "I am used to the cold." He said, "Take it." She took it, wrapping the rough wool around her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke and horse and him. Hastings sat down next to her, close enough to share body heat but not touching. The space was cramped. The other men were huddled on the far side of the horses. The storm raged outside, a curtain of gray water that isolated them from the world. Clara looked at Hastings. His profile was etched in the gray light, stern and unyielding. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. She shifted, trying to get comfortable on the hard stone. Her shoulder brushed his arm. He did not pull away. "You think we will find him?" she asked, her voice small against the roar of the rain. Hastings looked at her. "We will find him." "Alive?" Hastings hesitated. "That is why we ride." Clara shivered again, a violent tremor that shook her whole frame. Hastings turned fully toward her. Without a word, he lifted his arm and extended the edge of his own coat, inviting her in. It was a practical offer. Survival. But as Clara leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, and as he wrapped his arm around the blanket-covered bundle of her, the practicality dissolved into something else. It was warmth. It was the solid, beating thrum of his heart against her ear. It was the smell of rain and sage and the man who had become her anchor. Hastings sat rigid for a moment. Then, slowly, he relaxed. He rested his chin on the top of her head. They sat like that for an hour, the storm thundering a few feet away, wrapped in a silence that was loud with unspoken things. Clara's hand found its way to his chest, resting over his heart. She could feel the steady rhythm of it. It was a comfort that terrified her, because she knew how much she wanted to stay there. Hastings closed his eyes. He breathed in the scent of her hair, lavender, water, and dust. He knew he should move. He knew this was dangerous, but the cold was deep, and she was warm, and for the first time in 10 years, he did not feel alone in the dark. The rain stopped as quickly as it had begun, leaving the world scoured and smelling of wet creosote. They mounted up, the mud slick under the horses' hooves. The tracks led them north, toward the Bradshaw Mountains, toward the old mining district. "It is Dead Mule Gulch," Tohan said, recognizing the peaks, the silver mines. "They closed 10 years ago. It is a good place to hide things," Hastings said. They reached the ridge overlooking the camp at dusk. The mining camp was a ghost town of rotting wood and rusted machinery. A few shacks still stood, their tin roofs groaning in the wind. A large structure, likely the old assay office, had light spilling from its windows. Hastien lay on his stomach on the ridge, looking through a brass spyglass. Clara lay beside him. "I see horses," Hastien whispered. 12. He handed the glass to Clara. "Look by the big shed." Clara adjusted the focus. She saw men moving crates. They were heavy, requiring 2 men to lift. "That is not just supplies for a camp," she said. "That is cargo." Hastien took the glass back. He swept it right. "There." Clara looked where he pointed, near the entrance of a mine shaft. There was a makeshift pen. Inside, huddled together, were figures. Not just one child, there are 3 of them. Clara breathed. Little Yazi, and 2 others. "Who are they? Pueblo children?" "Maybe," Hastien said, his voice cold. "Or Apache." "Voss is not just stealing cattle. Clara, he is stealing labor. He is selling them south." Clara felt sick. This was not just a range war. This was something older and darker. This was slavery dressed up as banditry. Through the glass, she saw a man walk up to the pen. It was Cole Riker. He was holding a bucket. He threw the water over the children, laughing as they scrambled back. Then he reached through the fence and grabbed Yazi by the hair. Shaking him, Clara gasped. She started to push herself up, her hand going to the small pistol she carried in her bag. "Stop!" Hastien's voice was a low growl. His hand clamped onto her shoulder, heavy and unyielding. "He is hurting him," Clara hissed. "If you shoot, they die," Hastien said. "All of them." He pulled her down, pressing her into the dirt. His eyes were inches from hers. "Look at me." "Clara." She looked at him, her eyes swimming with angry tears. "We do not fight with anger," Hastien said. "Anger makes you shake. We fight with cold. You want to save him? Be cold." Clara stared at him. She took a ragged breath. She nodded. Hastien released her. We wait for dark. As the sun fell, they formulated a plan. Hastien wanted to go in and clear the camp. "There are 12 guns," he said. "We have 5. But we have the dark. I can take the sentries." "And if one of them fires a shot?" Clara asked. "They will kill the children before you cross the yard. And if we kill them all, the army will come. They will say the Navajo massacred a group of prospectors." "Then what?" Hastien asked, frustrated. "We need the paper," Clara said. "Men like Voss, they keep records. They have to pay the sheriff. They have to pay the buyers in Mexico. If we have the ledger, we have the sheriff's neck in a noose. We have leverage." "So we steal the children and the book?" Tohan asked. "Yes," Hastien decided. "Tohan, you and Kla take the horses down the wash. Be ready to run. Beachy, you watch the road." "Clara, I am coming with you," Clara said. "Yazi knows me. If he sees you coming out of the dark with a knife, he might scream. He trusts me." Hastien looked at her. He wanted to say no. He wanted to lock her in a safe box where the world couldn't touch her. But he knew she was right. "Stay behind me," he said. "Step where I step." The descent into the camp was a study in silence. Hastien moved like smoke. He wore moccasins now, having changed out of his boots. Clara followed, placing her feet exactly in the depressions he left. They reached the perimeter. A guard was leaning against a water barrel, smoking a cigarette. Hastien signaled Clara to stop. He moved forward, merging with the shadows. Clara held her breath. She didn't see him strike. She just saw the guard suddenly slump, caught by Hastien's arm before he hit the ground. Hastien lowered him gently, unconscious. He waved her forward. They reached the pen. Yazi was awake, shivering against the other 2 children. Clara approached the fence. She made a soft sound, a low hum she used when checking babies for fever. Yazi looked up. His eyes went wide. "Shh," Clara whispered, putting a finger to her lips. She reached through the slats and touched his hand. "We are going home." Hastien worked the lock on the gate with a piece of wire. It clicked open. "Take them," Hastien whispered to Clara. "Go to the wash. Tohan is waiting." "What about you? I need the book." Hastien turned toward the assay office. Clara hesitated, torn. Then she grabbed Yazi's hand. "Go," she told the children. "Run low." She watched them scurry into the darkness. Then she turned and followed Hastian. She would not leave him. Hastian slipped into the office through a side window. The room was empty, lit by a single kerosene lamp turned low. On the desk, amidst a clutter of whiskey bottles and maps, lay a thick, leather-bound ledger. He grabbed it, shoving it into his shirt. As he turned to the window, the door opened. Cole Riker stood there. He wasn't wearing his gun belt, but he had a Bowie knife on his hip. He looked at Hastian, and his eyes lit up with recognition and glee. "You!" Cole breathed. Hastian didn't hesitate. He launched himself across the room. Cole shouted, a raw cry of alarm that shattered the night. Hastian hit him, driving him back into the hallway. They crashed against the wall. Cole slashed with the knife. A wild, desperate arc. Hastian felt the bite of steel. A line of fire erupted along his left ribs. He ignored it. He grabbed Cole's wrist and twisted. Bone snapped. Cole screamed. Hastian drove a palm into Cole's chin, snapping his head back, knocking him cold, but the camp was awake. Shouts echoed outside. Gunshots cracked, bullets tearing through the wooden walls of the shack. Hastian grabbed Clara, who was climbing through the window. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted across the open ground. Bullets kicked up spurts of dust around their feet. Hastian kept himself between Clara and the shooters, his body a shield. They reached the wash. Tohan was there with the horses. The children were already mounted behind the riders. "Ride!" Hastian roared, swinging into his saddle. He winced, a grunt of pain escaping him. They thundered down the wash, the darkness swallowing them. Behind them, the muzzle flashes of the bandits' rifles sparked uselessly against the night. They rode for an hour without stopping, putting miles of twisted canyon between them and the mine. Finally, Hastian raised a hand. "We stop," he rasped. He slid from his saddle and nearly fell. Clara was there instantly, catching him. "You are hurt," she said, her hands feeling the sticky wetness on his side. "It is a scratch." Hastian lied. Clara helped him sit against a boulder. She struck a match, shielding the flame with her hand. The cut was long, tracing the line of his ribs. It was deep, but it hadn't hit the lung. "I need fire," Clara said to Tohan. "Small?" "Shield it." She opened her bag. She took out her needle and the gut thread. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them, furious with herself. "Stop it," she whispered to her hands. Hastian reached out and covered her trembling fingers with his own. His hand was large, warm, and steady despite the pain. "You are doing fine," he said softly. Clara looked at him. The firelight danced in his eyes. "I'm not afraid of the blood," she said, her voice tight. "I know. I am afraid of you dying. I am hard to kill. Clara." Clara took a breath. She threaded the needle. She cleaned the wound with whiskey from a flask Tohan carried. Hastian hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. She began to stitch. The skin was tough. She worked with precision, each loop a promise to keep him whole. "Why did you come back?" Hastian asked, watching her face. "You sent the children." "I wasn't leaving without you," Clara said, not looking up. "You are stubborn. I am loyal." She tied the final knot and snipped the thread. She applied a pad of gauze and wrapped his torso with a strip of linen. "There," she said. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her apron. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, aching clarity. The desert around them was silent, save for the crackle of the small fire and the breathing of the horses. Hastian looked at her. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, falling around her face. There was a smudge of soot on her cheek. She looked exhausted and beautiful and fiercely alive. He leaned forward slightly. The movement pulled at his stitches, but he didn't care. "Clara," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting the fire. "You should not want this," Hastian whispered. "Wanting me. It is a heavy thing to carry." Clara moved closer. She was on her knees in the dirt. "Do not decide for me what is heavy. Hastian Biage," she said fiercely. "Do not treat me like I am glass. I have lost a husband. I have lost a child. I have lost my home. I am still here." Hastings stared at her, stunned by the fire in her voice. "Wanting you is easy," he murmured, his resistance crumbling. "Keeping you alive, that is the harder part. Then let me worry about living," Clara said. She leaned in. She did not hesitate this time. She pressed her mouth to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a courtly press of lips. It was fierce. It tasted of salt and dust and whiskey. It was a collision of two lonely people who had found the only other person in the world who understood the language of their scars. Hastings' hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He kissed her back with a hunger that frightened him, a desperation to consume and be consumed. For a moment, there was no Voss, no sheriff, no town that hated them. There was only the heat of the fire and the heat of her skin. Clara pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against his. "I am not leaving," she whispered. "Do you understand?" Hastings closed his eyes, accepting the defeat that felt like a victory. "I understand." They rode back into the camp at dawn. The return was a triumph, but a quiet one. Desba ran to meet them. When she saw Yazai slide down from the horse, she fell to her knees. She did not scream this time. She simply gathered him into her arms and buried her face in his neck, sobbing the quiet sobs of a prayer answered. Hastings and Clara stood by the horses, watching. They did not touch, but they stood close, their shoulders brushing. Hastings reached into his shirt and pulled out the ledger. He handed it to Clara. "Read it," he said. Clara opened the book. Her eyes scanned the columns. "It is payments," she said. "Dates, amounts, initials. S.A. Sheriff Alden. R.R. Railroad? It is proof." Hastings said, "It is a start." Clara said, "But it is cryptic. A judge might throw it out. We need to know who R is. We need to match these dates to the thefts." But they had something. They had a weapon, high on the ridge overlooking the valley. 3 miles away. Dane Voss sat on his horse. He lowered his binoculars. He saw the children return. He saw the white woman standing next to the Navajo warrior. Beside him, the tracker, Silvers, spat on the ground. They took the book. "Boss," Voss smiled. It was a cold, terrifying expression. "Let them have it," Voss said. "Paper burns, Silvers, and so do people." He turned his horse. "Now, we stop playing bandits. Now, we go to war." The sun glinting off the silver conchos on his saddle, as the morning light illuminated the camp below, a scene of fragile joy under the shadow of a gathering storm. The noose was not tied with justice. It was tied with panic. Silver Creek had been a powder keg waiting for a spark, and Dane Voss provided the match with the precision of a butcher slicing close to the bone. The victim was a prospector named Silas Reed, a man whose only contribution to the town had been a bar tab he never paid, and a loud voice when he was drunk. He was found behind the livery stable with his throat cut, his pockets turned out, and a silver concho button pressed into the mud beside his head. It was a button from a Navajo saddle. The arrest was swift. A young rider named Bigay, who had come to town simply to trade turquoise for salt, was pulled from his horse by 3 men. They found a knife in his belt, as every man on the frontier carried, and declared it the murder weapon. There was no trial. There was no judge. There was only Sheriff Alden standing on the boardwalk, his thumb hooked in his gun belt, announcing that for the safety of the good people of Silver Creek, justice would be dispensed at noon the following day. The town did not recoil. It exhaled. Finally, they had a face for their fear. It was not the railroad pricing them out, or the drought drying their wells. It was the savage. It was a simple enemy, and they were hungry for a simple enemy. Clara McKenna stood in the office of Mayor Higgins, a man who smelled of bay rum and old paper. She slammed her hand on his desk, rattling the inkwell. "You cannot do this," she said, her voice shaking with a rage she could barely suppress. "There is no proof. Bigay was at the trading post when Reed was killed. Mr. Henderson saw him. The mayor did not look up from his ledger. Mr. Henderson has a hazy memory. Mrs. McKenna, he says he cannot be sure, because he is afraid." Clara cried. Because the sheriff told him to forget. This is murder. Mayor, if you hang that boy, you are hanging an innocent man." The mayor finally looked up. His eyes were watery and weak. "It is out of my hands. Clara, the town is frightened. They need to see that the law is working." "The law?" Clara laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. "This isn't law." "This is a blood sacrifice. You should be careful," the mayor said softly. "People are noticing whose side you are on. It is becoming bad for business." Clara walked out into the blinding sunlight. She felt the eyes of the town on her. Women she had helped through labor turned their backs. Men she had stitched up spat into the dust as she passed. When she reached her rented room, her landlord, Mr. Miller, was waiting on the porch. He did not meet her eyes. "I need the room by the end of the month. Mrs. McKenna, my sister is coming from St. Louis. She needs the space." "You have no sister." "Mr. Miller," Clara said quietly. Miller shifted his weight. "Just be out by the 1st. Clara went inside and sat on her narrow bed. The walls were closing in. She checked her medical bag, counting her supplies. She had become a ghost in a town of living men, erased by her refusal to hate. 3 miles away, on the ridge that overlooked the valley, Hastien watched the gallows being built. The sound of hammers striking wood carried on the wind, a rhythmic, hollow thudding that sounded like a heartbeat stopping. He stood with Chi and the other elders. The young men were pacing, their hands on their weapons. They wanted to ride. They wanted to burn the town to the ground. "It is a trap," Hastien said. His voice was like grinding stones. "They are going to hang Bigay," a young warrior shouted. "We must stop them. If we ride in there," Hastien said, turning to face them, "we justify everything they say about us. We kill a deputy, and the telegraph wires sing. By next week, the cavalry arrives. They will not hunt just the warriors. They will hunt the women. They will hunt the children. They will burn the corn and kill the sheep." "So we do nothing?" Chi asked, his voice trembling with age and bitterness. "We watch them neck stretch our brother." Hastien looked back at the town. He saw the geometry of the trap. Voss wanted a war. He wanted the Navajo to attack so he could bring in the army to clear the land for his cattle and his rails. "We do not give them a war," Hastien said. "We give them a shadow." That night, the moon was obscured by heavy clouds. Hastien took only 2 men, Tohan and Kla. They moved toward the jailhouse on foot, leaving their horses a mile out. The plan was not assault. It was extraction. They would blow the back wall with black powder stolen from the mine, grab Bigay, and vanish before the dust settled. But the sheriff was not stupid, and Dane Voss was not absent. As Hastien crept toward the alley behind the jail, a dog barked, a sharp, staccato alarm. A door swung open. A deputy, the one with the wandering eye, stepped out with a shotgun. He did not shout a challenge. He simply fired. The blast illuminated the street like a lightning strike. The buckshot went wide of Hastien, but it tore through the front window of the bakery across the alley. There was a scream, a woman's scream. Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, had been working late on the dough for the morning bread. Chaos erupted. Men poured out of the saloon. More gunshots cracked. "He shot her!" a voice roared. "The Indian shot Mrs. Gable." Hastien froze. He saw the shadow of the deputy reloading. He had a clear shot with his revolver. He could drop the man, but he saw the mob forming, the torches flaring to life. "Pull back," Hastien ordered, grabbing Tohan by the shoulder. "We can get him," Tohan hissed. "We have lost." Hastien snarled. "Go!" They retreated into the dark, slipping away as the town exploded into a frenzy of grief and rage. They did not save Bigay, and now they had been blamed for the murder of a white woman. The hanging happened at dawn. Hastien did not watch, but he felt it. He felt the silence that stretched across the valley when the hammer stopped. Grief descended on the camp like a heavy snow. It was a terrified grief. The elders gathered in Hastien's hogan, their faces lined with the memory of the past. "We must leave," Chi said, wringing his hands. "We must go deep into the canyons, or south to Mexico. If we run, they will hunt us down like wolves," Hastien said. "If we stay, they will kill us all." Chi cried. "I cannot walk that road again. Hastien, my legs are too old. My heart is too tired. Do not lead us into another long walk. Hastien sat by the fire, looking into the flames. His pride screamed for vengeance. He wanted to ride into Silver Creek and put a bullet in Alden's heart. He wanted to find Voss and tear him apart with his hands. But he looked at the faces around him. Desba holding her son. The old men shaking with palsy. He was not a warrior for himself anymore. He was a container for their safety. He had to be cold. He had to be stone. That evening, Clara drove her buggy out to the edge of the camp. She did not bring medicine this time. She brought herself. She found Hastien sitting on a flat rock overlooking the dry wash, away from the others. He looked diminished, as if the weight of the sky was finally pressing him into the earth. Clara sat beside him. She did not touch him. Not yet. They say you killed Mrs. Gable, she said softly. I did not fire a shot. Hastien said, it was the deputy. He panicked. It does not matter what is true. Clara said, it matters what they believe. Hastien picked up a stone and threw it into the dark. It made no sound when it landed. I should have killed them, he whispered. In the saloon, that first day. I should have killed the boy. I should have killed the sheriff. And then you would be dead, Clara said. And these people would be dead. I am failing them. Clara, I am trying to hold back a flood with my hands. Clara turned to him. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough, calloused, cold as the night air. I am afraid. Hastien, she confessed. He looked at her, surprised. You stood up to the sheriff. You walked into the mine. I am not afraid of dying, she said. I am afraid of losing you. Not to a bullet, but to the ice. She squeezed his hand. I see it in your eyes. You are turning yourself into a weapon. You are cutting away the parts of you that feel because you think that is the only way to survive. But if you do that, if you become just a thing that fights, then Voss wins, because he will have taken the man I know. Hastien looked at her. The moonlight caught the moisture in her eyes. The man you know is a ghost. Clara, no, she said firmly. The ghost is who you were. The man I know is the one who gave me his blanket, the one who saved a child he didn't know. Hastien looked away, toward the silhouette of the mountains. I had a wife, he said. The words came out rusty, unused. Clara went still. He had never spoken of this. Her name was Astza. Hastien said, she was small. She laughed at my tracking. She said I could not find water if I was standing in a river. A faint, sad smile touched his lips, then vanished. She was with me on the walk. She was strong, stronger than me. But the fever took her near the Rio Grande. She was burning up. I carried her for 3 days because the soldiers would not let us stop. He took a breath, a shuddering intake of air. She died on my back. Clara. I felt her spirit leave, and I could not stop to bury her. I had to leave her under a pile of stones by the road. I promised her I would never love anything again, because to love is to give the world a hostage. He turned his eyes to Clara. They were open, raw, terrifyingly vulnerable. You are a hostage, Clara. When I look at you, I see a place where they can hurt me. Clara moved closer. She placed her hand on his cheek, turning his face fully toward hers. I am not a hostage, she whispered. I am a choice. She leaned her forehead against his. I have never been chosen. Hastien, my husband. I was a utility to him. I was a nurse, a cook, a warm body. I was useful. But with you, when you look at me, I feel seen. I feel like I exist. She brushed her thumb over his cheekbone. Do not shut me out, she said. If we are going to break, let us break together. Do not make me stand outside the wall. Hastien closed his eyes. He leaned into her hand. The resistance went out of him. He let out a long, ragged sigh, the sound of a man setting down a burden he had carried for 1,000 miles. He turned his head and kissed the palm of her hand. It was a gesture of such profound reverence that Clara felt her heart stop. I will not shut you out, he whispered. They sat there for a long time. 2 exhausted souls huddled against the vast indifference of the night. There was no explicit passion, no desperate grasping. There was only the intimacy of shared breath, the way his shoulders supported her weight, the way her hand stayed in his. It was a desire that transcended the physical. It was the ache of belonging, the terrifying tenderness of finding home in a war zone. The next day, the war came to Clara's doorstep. She had returned to town to gather the last of her supplies before Mr. Miller evicted her. She was in the clinic room, packing bottles of tincture into a crate. When she smelled smoke, she ran to the door. 3 men were standing on the boardwalk. They were not locals. They were Voss's hired guns. One of them held a torch. The roof of the lean-to was already catching. The dry wood, seasoned by the desert sun, went up like parchment. "Get out, Mrs. McKenna," the man with the torch said casually. "Unless you want to cook." Clara grabbed her medical bag, the one thing she could not replace, and ran out. She stood in the dusty street, clutching the leather handle, watching her life burn. The flames licked up the side of the mercantile. Mr. Henderson ran out with a bucket, but the gunman stopped him with a look and a hand on his pistol. "Let the witch burn out," the gunman said. The town watched. People stood in their doorways. Sheriff Alden stood on the porch of the jail, watching with his arms crossed. No one moved. No one formed a bucket brigade. No one offered help. Clara looked at them. She looked at the faces she knew, faces she had wiped sweat from, faces she had seen in the vulnerability of pain. They looked away. They chose the safety of silence. Clara finally understood. Neutrality was not a lack of action. It was a choice. It was a costume that cruelty wore so it could walk down the street in daylight. She watched the roof collapse. Her jars shattered, the heat popping them like gunshots. Her bed, her books, her sanctuary, all of it turning to gray ash. She stood there until the flames died down to smoldering embers. She was covered in soot. Her dress was singed. She had nothing left in the world but the bag in her hand and the shoes on her feet. A horse approached. The crowd parted. Hastian rode down the center of the main street. He did not look at the sheriff. He did not look at the gunman. He looked only at Clara. He stopped his horse in front of her. He extended his hand. "Come," he said. The town held its breath. This was it. The line was drawn. To take his hand was to defect. It was to become the enemy. Clara did not hesitate. She reached up. Hastian grasped her forearm, his grip iron-strong, and swung her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into the rough wool of his coat. Hastian looked at the sheriff. "We are finished with this place," Hastian said. He turned the horse and walked it slowly out of town. No one spoke. No one stopped them. The shame was too thick to shout through. They rode back to the camp in silence. When they arrived, Hastian helped her down. He led her to the fire where the women were cooking. "She stays," Hastian announced to the camp. "She is with us." The women looked at Clara. They saw the soot. They saw the loss in her eyes. Desba stood up and walked over. She took Clara's medical bag from her hand and set it gently on a clean blanket. Then she handed Clara a cup of water. "Sit," Desba said. It was not an elaborate welcome. It was better. It was acceptance. But peace was a fleeting thing. An hour later, a rider came galloping in from the ridge. It was Beachy. "Dust," he shouted. A lot of dust. Coming from the town. Hastings climbed the ridge. He looked through the spyglass. It was a posse. Not just the sheriff and his deputies. It was 20 men, townsfolk, riled up by whiskey and fear, led by Voss's men. "They are coming to search for stolen goods," Hastings said, lowering the glass. "That is the lie they will use. But they are coming to burn us out." He turned to the camp. "We move," he ordered. "Pack only what you can carry. We go to the Canyon of the Dead." The camp exploded into controlled chaos. Tents were struck. Horses were loaded. Hastings moved among them, directing the flow. He was calm, precise, a general conducting a retreat. Clara worked alongside Desba, packing food into saddlebags. She felt a strange calm. She had lost her safety, but she had found her purpose. "We need time," Hastings said to Tohan. "The old ones move slow. If the posse catches us on the open plain, it will be a slaughter. I will hold them at the narrow pass," Tohan said. I can drop rocks. I can make them think there are many of us. No, Hastin said. It is too dangerous. I am not a child. Hastin, Tohan argued. You taught me to be a ghost. Let me be a ghost. Hastin looked at the boy. He saw the man trying to break out. He saw the courage that he himself had instilled. Take Kla, Hastin said. Do not engage. Just slow them down. Shoot into the air. Roll rocks. Make them cautious. Then run. Do you understand? Run. I understand. Tohan said. The evacuation began. The long line of Navajo moved into the mouth of the canyon, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. Hastin rode at the rear, Clara beside him. They listened to the distant echoes of gunshots from the pass. They are slowing them, Hastin said, but an hour later, the shooting stopped. There was a silence that felt heavy and wrong. Then, Kla came riding back alone. His horse was foaming. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm. Where is Tohan? Hastin demanded. Kla slid from his horse, gasping. They had the tracker. Silvers. He circled behind us. We didn't hear him. Where is Tohan? They took him. Kla choked out. They threw a rope. They dragged him. I tried to shoot, but my gun jammed. I ran. Hastin went rigid. His face turned a shade of gray that matched the ash of the fire. They took him. He repeated, Voss will not kill him, Clara said, her voice sharp with sudden realization. Not yet. He will use him. He knows Tohan is like a son to you. He is the bait. Hastin closed his eyes. Guilt crashed over him. He had sent the boy. He had allowed him to go. I have killed him, Hastin whispered. Just like Astza. I let him go, and I killed him. He slumped in the saddle, the strength draining out of him. Clara reached over and grabbed his arm. She shook him. Stop it, she commanded. Do not go to that dark place. Not now. Hastin looked at her, his eyes hollow. We cannot fight 20 men. Clara, we have the families to protect. The families are safe in the canyon, Clara said. The posse will not follow them into the rocks at night. They are town men. They are afraid of the dark. She pointed back toward the way they had come. But Voss isn't in the posse. Hastin, Voss is at his holding. That is where they will take Tohan. To the mine. We go back, Hastin asked. We go back, Clara said. We finish this. We take the ledgers. We take the boy. And we burn Voss's kingdom down. Hastin looked at her. He saw the soot on her face, the fierce set of her jaw. She had lost everything today. And yet she was ready to ride into hell for a boy who wasn't her blood. She was a fire that refused to die. He straightened in his saddle, the hollowness filled with a cold, hard resolve. You are right, he said. He turned to Chi. Take them to the strong sadness. Hide them. We will return. With Tohan? Chi asked. With Tohan. Hastin promised, or we will not return at all. Hastin and Clara turned their horses. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the desert floor. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They were no longer just allies. They were no longer just a nurse and a warrior. They were two halves of a weapon, forged in loss and sharpened by love, riding into the night to break the world that had tried to break them. They kicked their horses into a gallop, heading north, toward the mine, toward the darkness, toward the end. The outlaw holding was a scar cut into the side of the black mesa, a place where the shadows seemed to pool like stagnant water. It was hidden from the main trail by a labyrinth of slot canyons and guarded by men who had long ago traded their souls for silver. The air here smelled different than the open desert. It smelled of confined animals, unwashed bodies, whiskey, and the metallic tang of stolen life. Hastin and Clara moved through the perimeter darkness, two wraiths against the stone. They had left their horses a mile back, tethered in a dry wash, and covered the remaining distance on foot, stepping where the rock was solid to avoid the crunch of gravel. Hastin led his body low, moving with a silence that was less a skill and more a state of being. Clara followed, her breathing shallow, her medical bag left behind, carrying only the revolver Hastin had given her and the weight of her own terror. They reached the back of the main structure, a sprawling log building that served as both bunkhouse and command center. Through the chinks in the wood, light spilled out in yellow bars, cutting the dusty dark. Hastian signaled for a halt. He pressed his ear to the rough wood. Inside, voices murmured, the low, bored rumble of men waiting for violence. "We need the office," Hastian whispered, his lips barely moving. "That is where Voss keeps his paper." "And Tohan," Clara whispered back. "If he is alive, he is near the goods, the shed by the corral. They split the difference." Hastian moved toward the shed, signaling Clara to stay in the shadow of the water tower. She watched him go, a part of her chest tightening as if a string connecting them was being pulled taut. Hastian slipped the latch on the shed door. It groaned, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. But the wind covering the canyon masked it. He stepped inside. The smell hit him first, blood and sickness. Tohan was tied to a support beam. His face was a swollen mask of purple and red. One eye was swollen shut, and his breathing came in ragged, wet gasps. He hung by his wrists, his feet barely touching the dirt floor. Hastian felt a rage so pure and white-hot it nearly blinded him. He wanted to draw his knife and carve his way through the camp, to open throats and let the sand drink the blood of every man who had touched this boy. But he looked at Tohan's chest, rising and falling. The boy was alive. Slaughter would bring the camp down on them. Rescue required silence. He moved forward, cutting the ropes. Tohan slumped into his arms, a dead weight. "Uncle," the boy rasped, his voice a broken thing. "Quiet," Hastian murmured. "I have you." He lowered Tohan to the ground. Clara appeared at the door, having sensed the moment. She did not gasp when she saw the boy. She went to work. She knelt in the dirt, her hands moving over Tohan's ribs, his skull, his limbs. She worked with a terrifying efficiency, swallowing the scream that wanted to climb up her throat. "2 broken ribs," she whispered. "A concussion, dehydration. He can walk, but he cannot run. He will ride," Hastian said. "Wait," Clara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial of smelling salts she had salvaged from her kit. She snapped it under Tohan's nose. The boy jerked, his eyes flying open. "Breathe," Clara ordered softly. "We are leaving." Hastian left them for a moment, slipping across the yard to the main house. The office window was open a crack to let out the cigar smoke. He peered in. The room was empty. On the heavy oak desk sat a stack of ledgers. He climbed through the window, moving like smoke. He grabbed the books. He flipped one open. The pages were filled with columns of cattle brands, dates, and payments. And there, at the bottom of the page, was a signature that made his blood run cold. Sheriff Alden, and beside it, a stamped seal in red ink, a wheel with wings, the mark of a rail agent. This was not just rustling. This was a conspiracy that spanned the territory. The railroad needed the land cleared of Navajo and small ranchers. Voss was the broom, and the sheriff was the man holding the dustpan. Hastian shoved the books into his shirt and vaulted back out the window. He returned to the shed. "We have it," he said. "Let us go." They moved Tohan between them, his arms draped over their shoulders. They were halfway to the horses when a door banged open. "Hey!" a voice shouted. It was a guard, stepping out to relieve himself. He saw the 3 shapes moving in the moonlight. Hastian reacted instantly. He shoved Clara and Tohan toward the wash and spun around, his revolver clearing leather. "Run!" he roared. The guard fired. The shot went wild, sparking off a rock. But the canyon erupted. Gunshots echoed off the walls, multiplying the sound until it sounded like a war. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, pulling suspenders up and cocking rifles. Hastian fired 2 shots, dropping the guard and sending a second man diving for cover. He turned and sprinted after Clara. They reached the horses. Kla was there, holding the reins, his eyes wide with fear. "Go!" Hastian shouted, throwing Tohan onto his horse and slapping the animal's flank. They scrambled into their saddles as the air around them began to buzz with lead. It was a chaotic, desperate flight. The horses scrambled on the loose shale, sparks flying from their iron shoes. The moonlight turned the canyon into a landscape of jagged silver and deep black pools, a treacherous beauty that hid sudden drops and ankle-breaking holes. They rode hard, Hastian covering the rear, turning in his saddle to fire blindly into the dark to keep the pursuers' heads down. They reached the narrow pass, the choke point of the canyon. If they could clear this, they had the open desert. But the pass was blocked. Cole Riker sat on his horse in the center of the trail, flanked by 3 men. He had anticipated the route. He sat tall, his nose still bandaged, his eyes burning with a cold, sober hatred. End of the road. "Oh man!" Cole shouted. Hastian pulled his horse up hard. Clara and Tohan halted behind him. They were trapped. Voss's men were closing in from behind. Hastian looked at the walls. Steep, but climbable for a man, not for a horse. "Clara," Hastian said, his voice low, "take Tohan. Go up the scree. Hide in the rocks. I am not leaving you." Clara said, "Go!" Hastian barked. "You have the books. The books are the weapon. I am just the shield." He slapped her horse, sending it bolting toward the slope. Clara fought the reins, but the animal scrambled up the loose rock. She jumped off, dragging Tohan with her. Scrambling into the shadows of the boulders, Hastian turned back to Cole. "Just you and me, boy," Hastian said. Cole laughed. He dismounted slowly. He holstered his gun. He unbuckled his belt and let it drop. He wanted this. He needed this. "Get down," Cole said. "Let us finish what we started in the saloon. No bottles this time, just hands." Hastian looked at the men behind Cole. They were waiting, guns drawn. If he won, they would shoot him. If he lost, they would shoot him. But if he bought time, Clara might vanish into the dark. Hastian swung down from his saddle. He was tired. His side ached from the knife wound. He felt every year of his age in his joints. Cole rushed him. He was younger, faster, and fueled by a month of humiliation. He threw a right hand that connected with Hastian's jaw. Hastian's head snapped back. He tasted blood. He staggered. Cole hit him again, a hook to the ribs that drove the breath from Hastian's lungs. Hastian went down to one knee. "See?" Cole screamed, breathless. "You are just a man. You are nothing." Cole drew back his boot to kick Hastian in the face, and in that moment, the old warrior returned. Hastian caught the boot. He twisted, using Cole's momentum against him. Cole crashed into the dirt. Hastian rose. He wiped the blood from his lip. He stood over Cole, who was scrambling to get up. Hastian waited. He let Cole stand. He let Cole set his feet. Cole swung wild, a desperate, looping punch. Hastian stepped inside the arc. He didn't hit him. He simply grabbed Cole by the lapels of his jacket and slammed his forehead into the bridge of Cole's already broken nose. Cole crumpled. He fell to his knees, clutching his face, sobbing. Hastian stood over him. The moonlight washed them both in pale light. Hastian looked down at the boy who wanted so desperately to be a monster. "Now me, boy," Hastian whispered. He raised his fist. He could end it. He could crush the skull. It would be easy. It would be justice. But Hastian saw the fear in Cole's eyes. It was the same fear he had seen in the eyes of young soldiers, in the eyes of his own people on the walk. It was the fear of a child who realizes the world is too big and too hard. Hastian lowered his hand. "I will not give you the death of a man," Hastian said quietly. "You will live, and you will remember that I gave it to you." He turned his back on Cole. It was a mistake, not a tactical one, but a hopeful one. The men behind Cole raised their rifles. Hastian tensed, waiting for the impact. But a voice rang out from the darkness. "Hold fire!" Dane Voss rode out from the shadows of the canyon wall. He had Clara. His arm was wrapped around her neck, pulling her back against his saddle. He held a pistol to her temple. "Drop the gun, Hastian," Voss said pleasantly, "or the nurse retires early." Hastian felt a cold spike of panic drive through his chest. It was a physical blow, harder than anything Cole had thrown. He looked at Clara. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but she was not screaming. Hastian unbuckled his gun belt. It fell to the dust. "Kick it away," Voss commanded. Hastian kicked it. "Now the books," Voss said. Where are they? Clara struggled. Don't give them to him. Hastien, quiet, Mrs. McKenna, Voss said, tightening his grip. I don't have them. Hastien lied. They are with the boy. He is gone, Voss chuckled. Then we will just have to wait for him to fall out of the rocks. In the meantime, Voss raised the pistol from Clara's head and pointed it at Hastien. I think I will tidy up the loose ends. The gunshot that followed did not come from Voss. It came from the rocks above. A distinct, sharp crack of a Winchester. Voss's hat flew off his head. He flinched, the horse rearing. Cla had circled back. He was high up on the ledge, firing down. In the confusion, Clara moved. She didn't try to run. She stomped her heel down, driving it into the instep of Voss's boot. Voss howled in pain. Clara threw her head back, smashing it into his nose. Voss's grip loosened. Clara threw herself sideways, falling from the horse, hitting the ground hard. Clara! Hastien roared. He dove for his gun. The canyon erupted in fire again. Cla was firing rapidly, providing cover. Hastien grabbed his revolver and fired at Voss, forcing the cattleman to wheel his horse and retreat behind a boulder. Hastien reached Clara. She was gasping, winded, but she scrambled up. Run! She choked out. They ran for the rocks, Hastien firing over his shoulder. They scrambled up the scree slope, bullets kicking up dust around their boots. They reached the ledge where Cla was firing. Go, Uncle! Cla shouted. I will hold them! No! Hastien shouted. We go together! They are climbing the other side, Cla said, pointing. If I do not stop them, they cut us off. Go! Take the white woman! Take the book! Hastien looked at the young man. He saw the resolve in his eyes. It was the same look Hastien had worn 30 years ago. Hastien grabbed Cla's shoulder. Do not die for nothing. I die for the people. Cla said, Go! Hastien pulled Clara and Tohan up the trail. Behind them, the steady rhythm of Cla's rifle echoed against the canyon walls, a lonely drumbeat of defiance. Then there was a silence, a single shot, and then nothing. Hastien did not look back. He could not. He swallowed the grief like a stone, adding it to the pile in his belly, and kept climbing. They reached Silver Creek 2 days later. They did not sneak in. They did not hide. It was Sunday evening. The church bell was ringing, calling the faithful to evening service. The town was washed in the golden light of a setting sun that seemed indifferent to the sins of the men who walked under it. Hastien, Clara, and Tohan rode down the main street. They were a sight to behold. Dust coated them like a second skin. Hastien's shirt was stiff with dried blood. Clara's dress was torn, her hair wild. Tohan slumped in his saddle, tied upright so he wouldn't fall. People stopped on the boardwalks. They stared. The whispers started, then died into a heavy silence. They rode straight to the white-clapboard church. The doors were open. The sound of a hymn drifted out. Rock of Ages. Hastien dismounted. He helped Clara down. She held the ledger against her chest like a shield. They walked up the steps. Hastien pushed the doors open. The singing faltered. Heads turned. The pastor, Reverend Smalls, stood at the pulpit, his mouth open mid-note. The hymn died away. The silence in the sanctuary was absolute. Clara walked down the center aisle. Her boots echoed on the floorboards. She stopped in front of the altar. She turned to face the congregation. She saw the mayor. She saw the shopkeepers who had refused her service. She saw the women who had turned their backs. Read it, Clara said. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from desert air, but it carried to the back pews. She slammed the ledger onto the pulpit in front of the reverend. I beg your pardon. Mrs. McKenna, the reverend stammered. This is the house of God. Then let the truth be spoken in it, Clara shouted. Read the names. Reverend, read who sold their souls for beef and railroad money. Sheriff Alden stood up from the front pew. He was wearing his Sunday best. His face was pale. That is enough. Clara, he said, stepping into the aisle. You are hysterical. You are disturbing the peace. I'm disturbing your prophet. Sheriff, Clara retorted. Alden put a hand on his gun. That book is stolen property. I'm arresting you for theft. Theft? Clara laughed. It was a wild, dangerous sound. These are receipts. Sheriff, receipts for stolen horses. Receipts for Navajos sold into labor in Mexico. Receipts for the murder of Silas Reed." A murmur ran through the room. Hastien stepped forward. He stood beside Clara, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. He looked at the sheriff. "Touch her," Hastien said softly, "and you will answer to God right here." A man in a gray suit stood up near the back. He was clean-shaven, holding a bowler hat. It was the rail agent, Mr. Sterling. "This is ridiculous," Sterling said smoothly. "These are the ravings of a woman who has lost her mind and a savage who belongs in chains. That book means nothing. It is a forgery." Hastien looked at the man. "I know the tracks," Hastien said. "I know where the spur line is being surveyed illegally. I know where the water is diverted." Sterling sneered. "You are one man, Indian. You are nothing against the Union Pacific. We will bury you." "You can try," Hastien said, "but I know this land. I know every canyon, every rock. You want to bring your trains. I will melt the tracks with fire. I will drop the mountains onto your engines. You will not cross my land." The town was shifting. Men were looking at Alden. They were looking at Sterling. They saw the fear behind the sheriff's bluster. They saw the arrogance of the rail agent. "Is it true?" Alden, the blacksmith, a giant of a man named Lars, asked, "Did you take money to look the other way on the raids?" It was for the town's protection," Alden stammered. The doors of the church slammed open. Dane Voss stood there. He was bandaged, his nose a splinted wreck, his arm in a sling, but he held a Winchester in his good hand. Behind him were 6 men. "Enough talk," Voss rasped. Kill them all!" The congregation screamed and dove for the floor. Hastien moved. He shoved Clara behind the heavy oak pulpit and overturned the communion table for cover. "Get down!" Hastien roared. Voss's men opened fire. Wood splintered. Stained glass shattered, raining colored shards onto the pews. Hastien returned fire, his shots precise. He hit one gunman in the shoulder, spinning him around. Lars, the blacksmith, didn't hide. He grabbed a heavy brass candelabra and hurled it at a gunman, knocking him cold. The town was choosing. They were tired of the fear. They were tired of the hanging. "Get the rifles," someone shouted. Hastien grabbed Clara's arm. Out the back, they scrambled toward the vestry door. They burst out into the alley. The sun was gone now. The twilight was purple and deep. Voss was waiting. He had anticipated the move. He stood at the end of the alley, raising his rifle. "This time, I don't miss." Voss smiled. Clara froze. Hastien stepped in front of her, but Voss didn't fire. A shot rang out from the roof of the mercantile. Voss jerked. His rifle fell. He clutched his leg, falling to the dust. Tohan. The boy had untied himself from the horse. He had climbed the ladder to the roof with broken ribs. He held Hastien's spare rifle. Hastien ran to Voss. He kicked the gun away. He stood over the cattleman. "It is over," Hastien said. Voss looked up, grimacing. "You think this stops it? The railroad is coming. Progress is coming. You're just dust in the wind." "Old man, maybe," Hastien said, "but tonight, the wind blows back." Sheriff Alden came running out of the church, trying to reach his horse. He was stopped by a wall of men, the blacksmith, the baker, the farmers. They didn't have guns. They had hammers and pitchforks and the heavy weight of their own conscience. "Going somewhere, Sheriff?" Lars asked. Alden dropped his hands. He looked at the town he had sold, and he saw no mercy in their eyes. The shooting stopped. The smoke drifted through the streets, smelling of sulfur and burnt powder. Hastien holstered his gun. He turned to Clara. She was standing near the church wall, shaking. The adrenaline was leaving her, leaving behind a vacuum that trembled. She looked at him. She looked at the blood on his shirt, the dust in his hair, the fierce, unyielding life in his eyes. "It is done," she whispered. "Not all of it," Hastien said, "but enough for today." He walked to her. Clara didn't say anything. She simply collapsed forward. Hastien caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against him. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being alive. "I sent the copies," she choked out against his chest. "With the preacher, weeks ago." To the judge in Prescott. Hastings stroked her hair. I knew you would. They stood there as the dawn began to break over the desert, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The smoke rose from the street, twisting into the air. Hastings held her, and for the first time in his life, he did not look at the horizon to see what danger was coming. He looked at the woman in his arms, and he knew that he was home. I love you, Clara whispered, the words fierce and frightened. Hastings rested his chin on her head. He looked at the sun rising over the red earth. I know, he said softly, and I am not going anywhere. Justice arrived in the Arizona Territory not on the wings of an angel, but on the back of a tired mule ridden by a circuit judge named Thornton. He was a man with a face like a dried riverbed, and a patience that had been worn thin by 30 years of border disputes and hangings. He arrived 3 weeks after the shooting at the church, accompanied by a troop of federal marshals who looked at the town of Silver Creek with the suspicion one might reserve for a snake that had just stopped rattling. The wheels of the law turned slowly, grinding with the friction of bureaucracy, but the ledgers Hastings and Clara had retrieved provided the grease. There was no wiggling out of it. The ink on the pages spoke of dates, dollars, and names. It detailed the theft of cattle, the sale of human beings into the silver mines of Sonora, and the payments made to look the other way. Sheriff Alden did not go down with a fight. He went down with a whimper, claiming until the very end that he was a victim of circumstance, a man trying to keep the peace in a savage land. Judge Thornton was unimpressed. He sentenced Alden to 20 years in the territorial prison at Yuma, a place where the heat was said to cook a man's brain inside his skull before his sentence was half done. Dane Voss, his legs shattered by Tohan's bullet and his nose a ruin from Clara's forehead, sat in the makeshift courtroom with a silence that was more unnerving than his rage. He knew the game was over. The railroad connection he had killed for was investigated, the surveyors recalled, and the contracts voided. Voss was sentenced to hang, not for the cattle, but for the proven murder of the prospector Silas Reed, the crime he had tried to pin on the Navajo rider Begay. When they led Voss away, he passed Hastings, who stood at the back of the room. Voss stopped, his chains rattling. You win nothing. Indian. Voss spat. The trains will come anyway. If not me. Another man. If not today. Tomorrow. Hastings looked at him with eyes that held no triumph, only the flat, hard resolve of the desert. Then we will be here tomorrow. Too, Hastings said. The town of Silver Creek was changed, but it was not transformed. Human nature does not shift as quickly as a sand dune in a windstorm. There was no great parade of apology. There were no sudden embraces between the shopkeepers and the Navajo elders. Prejudice did not vanish. It simply lost one of its uniforms. Some people, like Lars the blacksmith, came forward quietly. Lars brought a set of new hinges for the clinic Clara was building. He laid them on the ground, wiped his massive hands on his apron, and looked at his boots. I should have stood up sooner. Mrs. McKenna, Lars rumbled. I am sorry. Clara looked at the man, seeing the shame that reddened his neck. Thank you. Lars, she said. The hinges are good. Others, like the mercantile clerk Mr. Henderson, glared louder than ever. They resented the disruption. They resented that the mirror had been held up to their cowardice. They refused to sell Clara flour or sugar, claiming shortages that miraculously resolved when a rancher walked in. But the venom had been drawn from the bite, without the sheriff to enforce the hate. It became a sullen, quiet thing, hiding in the shadows of the saloons. Clara did not try to rebuild her life in the town. That life was ash. Instead, she looked to the east, to a patch of land near the entrance of the canyon where the Navajo camp lay. It was a no-man's land, a buffer zone between the red rocks and the town limits. She started with a tent. Then, she began to mix mud and straw. She did not build alone. On the second day, Desba arrived with 3 other women. They did not ask if Clara needed help. They simply set down their baskets and began to work. They knew how to make adobe that would withstand the monsoon rains. They knew how to position the windows to catch the morning breeze and shun the afternoon heat. They worked in a rhythm that required no English and no Navajo. It was the language of labor, the slap of wet mud, the scrape of a trowel, the passing of a waterskin. The women did not trust Clara because she was good, or because she was kind. Kindness was cheap. They trusted her because she had stayed. When the fire came, she had not run. When the guns were drawn, she had stood in front of the pulpit. Hastien came every evening. He did not build. That was women's work in the tradition of his people. But he brought wood. He brought cedar posts for the roof and heavy stones for the foundation. He was mourning the loss of Cla. The young rider who had died on the ledge to buy them time sat on him like a heavy coat he could not take off. Grief came in waves. Some evenings, Hastien would sit by the fire Clara had built, staring into the coals, his silence absolute. In the beginning, Clara wanted to fill that silence. She wanted to offer platitudes, to tell him that Cla died a hero, that time would heal it. But she learned, quickly, that such words were for people who feared pain. Hastien did not fear it. He respected it. So she learned not to fix it. She learned to stand beside it. She would sit near him, mending a shirt or grinding herbs, and let his grief have its space. She became a witness, not an intruder. One evening, as the walls of the clinic were rising waist high, Hastien spoke. He was young, Hastien said, his voice rough. He had not yet chosen a wife. He had not yet woven his first blanket. He chose how he died. Clara said softly. Hastien nodded slowly. He gave his life so we could keep ours. It is a debt I cannot pay back. You pay it back by living. Hastien, by making sure his sacrifice bought something real. Hastien looked at the half-built walls of the clinic. He looked at the Navajo children playing near the creek, safe for the first time in months. It bought this, he said. Tohan healed slowly. His ribs knit together, and the bruising faded from his face. But the boy who had gone up the mountain did not come back down. A man returned in his place. He walked with a steadier spine. He no longer looked for approval. He looked for responsibility. He shadowed Hastien. He watched how Hastien spoke to the elders, how he listened more than he talked. He saw that strength was not in the loudness of a voice or the quickness of a gun hand. He saw that true strength was restraint. It was the power to destroy held in check by the wisdom to build. One afternoon, Tohan sat with Hastien while they repaired a bridle. "Uncle," Tohan asked, "when Cole Riker was on the ground, when you had him, why did you not kill him?" Hastien threaded a leather strip through a silver buckle. "Because he wanted me to," Hastien answered. Tohan frowned. "He wanted to die. He wanted me to confirm what he believes, that I am a savage, that I am a monster. If I killed him in anger, I become what he hates. If I let him live, I force him to carry his own shame. That is a heavier burden than a grave." Tohan thought about this. It is hard to be that strong. It is the hardest thing, Hastien agreed. But it is the only way to stop the wheel from turning. Blood calls for blood. Somewhere. You have to cut the spoke. The clinic was finished in late autumn. It was small, sturdy, and smelled of drying earth and sage. Clara moved her few possessions in, a cot, a table, and the new supplies she had ordered from Prescott with the last of her savings. But the town had one final test for her. It was a Tuesday. Clara was treating a ranch hand for an infected thumb when a group of 5 men rode up. They were not Voss's hired guns. Those had scattered to the wind. These were town men, the bitter dregs who felt their importance slipping away. They were led by a man named Garrett, a failed prospector who blamed the Indians for every vein of gold he never found. Garrett stepped off his horse and walked to the door of the clinic. He kicked the frame. "We don't want this here," Garrett announced. "You are too close to the road, Mrs. McKenna. It is an eyesore." Clara finished bandaging the ranch hand's thumb. She washed her hands in a basin. She turned to face him. "I own the deed to this land. Mr. Garrett. I bought it from the territory last week." "We don't care about paper," Garrett sneered. "We care about decency. You running a house for savages right next to decent folk, it ain't right. We think you should move on. Maybe go back east where they like this sort of thing." He put his hand on his holster. It was a threat, clumsy but real. Clara felt the old fear flutter in her stomach, but it was faint, like a moth against a window pane. She walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch. "I am not going anywhere," she said. Garrett laughed. "You think because the sheriff is gone, you are safe. Accidents happen. Clara, fires happen. I would not talk about fires." "Mr. Garrett," a voice rumbled. Garrett spun around. Hastian was there, but he was not alone. Standing behind Hastian were 20 men from the camp. Tohan was there, holding a rifle loosely in the crook of his arm. Chi was there, and coming from the other direction, from the road, was Lars the blacksmith, and Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, and the ranch hand Clara had just treated. They formed a semicircle around Garrett and his men. "You fellas are lost," Lars said, crossing his massive arms. "The saloon is that way." Garrett looked at the Navajo warriors. He looked at the blacksmith. He looked at Clara, who stood on her porch with a calm that terrified him. "This ain't over," Garrett muttered, backing toward his horse. "It looks over to me," Lars said. Garrett mounted up. He glared at Clara, then at Hastian. He spurred his horse and rode away, his men following in a cloud of dust that settled quickly in the still air. Clara looked at the people standing in her yard. She looked at Lars. "Thank you," she said. Lars tipped his hat. "You fixed my wife's fever last winter. Ma'am, I reckon I owe you a fence." Hastian walked up the steps. He stood beside her. He did not say a word, but the proximity of his shoulder was a fortress. A week later, a rider arrived from Fort Defiance. He was a captain, a man with a stiff mustache and a uniform that was too clean for the desert. He came to the camp asking for Hastin Biage. They sat outside Hastin's hogan. The captain drank the coffee Hastin offered, though he grimaced at the bitterness. "We have heard of your exploits, Hastian," the captain said. "You know this country better than our maps. You know where the water is. You know the Apache trails. I know them." Hastian agreed. "The army needs men like you. We are offering you a position. Chief of Scouts for the regiment, the pay is $50 a month. You would have a uniform, rations, protection for your family. It was a fortune. It was safety. It was legitimacy in the eyes of the white world." Hastian looked at the captain. He looked at the blue uniform. He remembered the long walk. He remembered the soldiers who had whipped the elders when they slowed down. "And what would I do?" "Captain?" Hastian asked. "You would track," the captain said. "Renegades, Apache, Navajo who break the reservation limits." Hastian set his cup down. "So you want to pay me to hunt my own people," he said. "You want to pay me to put chains on men who want to be free. It is the law. Hastian, the territory is changing. You can be part of the order, or you can be part of the problem." Hastian stood up. He looked at the vast, red landscape that stretched out before them. "My loyalty is to this land, Captain, and to the people who bleed into it. It is not to a paper promise from Washington. I will not wear your coat, and I will not track my brothers for your silver." The captain stood up, brushing dust from his trousers. "You are making a mistake. The world is moving on. You will be left behind. Then I will be in good company," Hastian said. He watched the captain ride away. He felt lighter. He had refused the safety of the conqueror, and in doing so, he had kept his soul. The romance between Hastian and Clara did not explode like a powder keg. It grew like the ironwood tree, slow and incredibly hard. They learned how to be close without the adrenaline of danger. This was a new challenge. Danger had been a distraction. Peace required honesty. They spent their evenings together. Hastian would come to the clinic, and they would sit on the porch as the stars wheeled overhead. They learned the map of each other's silence. Clara learned that when Hastian rubbed his left wrist, he was thinking of the past. Hastian learned that when Clara hummed a specific tune, she was thinking of the child she had lost. One night, the air was cold, smelling of coming winter. They were sitting on a rug in Clara's main room, the fire casting dancing shadows on the adobe walls. Hastian reached out and took her hand. He studied her fingers, tracing the scars from her work, the needle pricks, The burns from boiling water. You have warrior's hands, he said softly. Clara looked at him. Her heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm. I used to think I had to be hard, she said. After my husband died, I thought softness was a weakness, that if I let myself want things, I would break. And now, Hastien asked, now I'm tired of being hard. Hastien, she moved closer to him. I want a life that includes softness, she whispered. I want to feel the wind without bracing against it. I want to touch you without looking over my shoulder to see who is watching. She looked into his eyes. I want desire, Hastien. Not as a shame, but as proof that I survived, that I am still a woman, and not just a widow. Hastien cupped her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. I thought my heart was a stone. He admitted. I thought I had buried it on the road to the Bosque Redondo. I thought a home was something temporary, a tent you strike in the morning. He leaned his forehead against hers. But when I am with you, I imagine walls that stay. I imagine a fire that does not go out. They kissed then. It was not the desperate, fierce kiss of the canyon escape. It was a slow, deepening exploration. It was a confession breathed between lips. It was the tenderness of two people who had walked through fire and found that they were not ash. That night, Hastien stayed. There was tension in the sleeping, the strangeness of a body next to his after so many years of solitude. But it was a good tension. It was the tension of a life expanding to make room for another. The social cost was real, and they confronted it head-on. A traveling merchant, selling patent medicines, stopped at the clinic. He saw Hastien chopping wood in the yard while Clara hung laundry. You know, ma'am, the merchant said, leaning over the fence, folks talk. They say you are living with a buck. It ain't proper. You will never be accepted in decent society again. Clara paused, a clothespin in her mouth. She took it out. Proper, she said, is just a word people like you use to control people like me. She pointed to the road. Keep moving, sir. We have no need for snake oil here. We have real medicine. Hastien met her halfway between their worlds. He did not ask her to become Navajo, and she did not ask him to become white. When the winter ceremonies began, the night chant to heal the sick, Hastien brought Clara. He did not bring her into the center of the hogan, where the sacred sand paintings were made. That was not for her. But he sat her near the entrance, among the families. She watched the dancers in their masks, the firelight catching the spruce boughs. She listened to the chanting, a rhythmic drone that seemed to vibrate in the earth itself. She did not understand the words, but she understood the intent. It was a restoration of balance. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to respect the mysteries she could not name. In return, Clara taught Hastien the weapons of her world. She sat with him at the table, the oil lamp burning low, and taught him how to read the territorial legal notices. She taught him how to file a claim for grazing rights. She taught him how to document the birth of every child in the camp, creating a paper trail that the government could not ignore. Paper is a shield, she told him. They respect ink more than blood. Hastien hated it. He hated the stiffness of the pen, the dry logic of the law, but he learned it. He used it to block a water diversion project 3 months later. He used it to secure the release of a cousin arrested for vagrancy. He turned their own bureaucracy into a wall to protect his people. One afternoon in early spring, a wagon train of prisoners passed through Silver Creek on its way to the railhead. They were chain gang men, destined for the penitentiary. Hastien and Clara were in town buying seed. They stood on the boardwalk as the wagon rolled past. In the back, shackled to the floor, sat Cole Riker. He looked older. The arrogance had been beaten out of him, replaced by a dull, bitter hollowness. He was thin, his clothes rags. He looked up and saw them. He saw Hastien standing tall, his hand resting lightly on Clara's waist. He saw the quiet dignity of the man he had tried to break. Cole's eyes met Hastien's. For a moment, there was a flicker of the old hate, but it died instantly, smothered by shame. Cole looked down at his manacled hands. He could not hold the gaze. Hastien did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply watched, calm as a mountain watching a storm pass. He has his life, Clara whispered. And he has his memory. Hastien said, "That is punishment enough." The wagon rolled on, disappearing into the dust. The landscape closed around the story as it had opened it. The wide indifference of the sky, the harsh wind that scoured the mesas, the sun that demanded everything. But near the camp, there was a change. Beside the adobe clinic, there was a patch of green. Clara had planted a garden. It was an act of stubborn optimism. She planted squash and beans and corn, using seeds Desba had given her. She watered them by hand, carrying buckets from the creek. It was a small splash of life against the red dust. It was fragile. Yes, a frost could kill it. A drought could wither it. But it was there. The story ends at sunset. The sky was a riot of violet and burnt orange, the clouds streaked with fire. Hastien and Clara stood outside the clinic, watching the light fade from the canyon walls. Hastien reached out and took Clara's hand. He did not do it secretly. He did not check to see if anyone was watching. He held her hand openly, his fingers lacing with hers. 2 riders passed by on the road, cattlemen from a neighboring range. They slowed their horses, staring at the white woman and the Navajo warrior standing together. Hastien did not flinch. He looked back at them, his chin lifted. Clara leaned into him. She felt the rough wool of his coat, the solid warmth of his body. She was unafraid. The riders moved on, shaking their heads, disappearing into the twilight. "It will always be hard," Hastien said quietly, watching them go. "I know," Clara answered. "But we are here." "Yes," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "We are here." They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into the cool blue of evening. Their love did not erase the tragedy of the past. The scars were still there on Hastien's back, on Clara's heart, on the land itself. But love does not need to erase scars to be true. It only needs to outlast the wound. And as the first star appeared in the vast western sky, they turned and walked together into the house they had built, closing the door against the wind, but leaving the light in the window burning. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope Hastien and Clara's journey through the dust and shadows of the American West resonated with you. I would love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below sharing your location. If you enjoyed this tale, I encourage you to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of grit, survival, and the human heart. Please share your thoughts on the ending in the comments in English. I read every one and value your perspective. Safe travels on your own trails.